The HR Stories podcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories helps businesses and nonprofits better manage the employee experience, providing the tools, training, and resources they need to take their organization to the next level. Each week on the HR Stories podcast, management and HR consultants John Thalheimer and Chuck Smickian dive into the stories that matter to small business owners, nonprofit leaders, and HR professionals. We continue to be amazed at how companies allow poor decision-making, lack of knowledge, or in some cases, hubris to cause harm to their organizations. Each week, we discuss stories where companies must pay large fines, lose great talents, and even stain their reputation within the community. And then we tell you how to avoid the same fate. Welcome to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story. Good morning, everybody. Or good afternoon. I don't know what time it is where you are. How you doing, Chuck?
I am fantastic. It's September, but it is still hot here in the Orlando, Central Florida area. Still hot. I'm not feeling the crisp, cool licks of fall yet.
Okay. All right. Yeah, we haven't got them. We were up in New Hampshire in August, so we had a little bit of that. Where hopefully we'll get some here soon in Nashville, Tennessee. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, this is exciting because, as you know, Chuck, we are continuing the conversation around employee rights today. And I'm so excited. We had such a great conversation last time, and so I'm great to kind of continue that conversation as well. But I think we should probably get into our HR in the news segment. So what's going on in the news? Tell me some stories.
Yeah, well, when we're talking about employee rights, John, one of the things that you have brought up several times, and as I know, you teach many payroll law type classes, and I saw this and it caught my eye because we're talking about the employees' rights to overtime. And a lot of times we think it's very simple, but there's something called the regular rate. We've explained it a couple of times on our podcast, but you have to take other things into account when paying overtime. And Google just learned this lesson the hard way. They had to pay $8.4 million in a settlement because they failed to pay their non-exempt employees from 2017 to 2022 the correct overtime rate. Wow. Yeah. And it's interesting because we know that sales commissions and sometimes bonuses and things like that can affect that. But in this situation, the employees were awarded restricted stock units and also commissions. So Google did not correctly put that into the pot, shall we say, when they calculated overtime. So that's a big deal, and that is something that a lot of companies just need to kind of keep their eye out for, engage an HR professional, a payroll professional, to make sure that you're paying your overtime correctly.
Yeah, right. And I think, just to clarify for everyone, when you're calculating overtime, it's 1.5 times their regular rate. That regular rate is not their hourly rate. That regular rate includes the discretionary bonuses, commissions, that kind of stuff. Now, there are things that are excluded, right? We were talking before we went on air. There are certain things that are excluded, and it was in December of 2019. They sent out a memo, the Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division sent out a memo clarifying what is included and what's not included. So I would definitely, if you're not sure, I would definitely pull that up at the Department of Labor. I think it's a fact sheet. I think it's called the final ruling on what's included or something in the regular rate. So just kind of paying attention to that, I think, would be good for everyone to do. But boy, man, if you're messing that up, and it's something that a lot of companies do, And I've read many stories about it. And so I think it's just something to be paying attention to because we don't think about it. We don't like, it's not
Yeah.
like, oh, we're doing hourly rate, blah, blah, blah. Oh, we gave them a bonus and now we're paying that out. We have to calculate that out. So
Yeah.
something
And a lot of companies think, oh, it won't happen to me. Folks, if you have hourly employees, non-exempt hourly employees, and you're giving them extra money beyond their salary, you may fall into this. So, well, I'll find that article, John, and I'll put the link in the show notes.
Oh, great. Fantastic. Oh, that's good.
Yeah. What do you got, John? I know you always have some really cool stuff.
I got some interesting stories. So I was going through the newspaper and I found one, right? It was a big, bold headline. Here it is, right? Here's the headline. Illegal employee teen who lost their hand in a meat grinder awarded a whopping $1,143. And really, this is what they're calling. They're calling out how this employee, so he was 17 years old, and he was using a meat grinder. And so this company processed deer meat. And so they were hired this 17-year-old to help. And he lost his hand in the meat grinder, which is a terrible accident and that kind of stuff. And so under federal law, the Fair Labor Standard Act, there's child labor laws, right? And so anybody under the age of 18, there are certain machines, dangerous machines, that they should not be using them, one of them being a meat grinder. And the bent of the article was, is that enough compensation for that person's hand?
No, obviously
not. They were making the argument that it wasn't. The judges felt like, hey, the person's 17-year-old. They should be knowing how to properly operate this. Obviously, it doesn't. The article didn't go into the details of what instructions did he get, what non-instructions did he get. But we need to be. The reason I bring the article up is we need to be careful with the child labor laws. You need to understand them. So if you're hiring somebody under 18, you need to know what they cannot do. And as the age gets younger, there's less and less things they can do. There's hour restrictions, and just paying attention to that. And so you really need to do two things. You need to look at the Fair Labor Standard Act for child labor laws and your state child labor laws as well. And so just don't assume, oh, that person really knows what they're doing. And we've trained them and we're doing everything. So everything seems really safe. That doesn't mean you're not breaking the laws, right? And so kind of being on there as well becomes interesting.
Yeah. And that was an OSHA fine. We don't know what the Department of Labor is weighing in on child labor law. They may come after them for something else, I guess.
Yeah. Well, so it went through. I mean, it went to the judge. And so just kind of paying attention to that, I think, is kind of important just to make sure that we're addressing it.
Okay.
I have another one. I don't know if you want me to jump in again. I have another.
Yeah,
story.
Go ahead, because I do have something for you from your favorite subject, AI, HR, and AI, and HR and recruiting and AI. But let's hear what else you got. Oh, that's a little tease, for you.
I love it. You're getting good at these teases. So I was doing some research and I found that they found that remote workers, the research is finding that they are less productive at home.
Okay.
And so again, this is one out of many, many researches out there. But they're saying that in certain circumstances, remote workers are less productive at home. And I think the bent of this was those individuals that are inexperienced in the workplace are probably going to be less efficient from working at home than those that are have been in the workplace for a long time, are experienced, know their jobs well, know what needs to get done, have the capabilities of doing it on their own, will be more productive at home. And so I think it goes back, and you and Chuck and I have had this Chuck, have had this conversation numerous times around making sure that your remote workers, whether they're working at home or out on the road or wherever they are, have proper training for them to know how to do their job and know who to ask to if there is questions, that kind of stuff. And really, the managers need to over communicate, right? And so I think that's a really important thing in there.
Yeah, it's a trust but verify situation. and not all jobs are great for remote work. Some are, some are not. But that makes sense that if it's one of your first jobs and you're starting in remote work, and maybe you don't have set goals, you don't have set projects or something along those lines. You're not, because I remember when remote work happened with COVID, a lot of us worked in the office, and next thing we're working at home, and people were still like, okay, I got to keep going. I got to keep going. But now maybe some people are trying to take advantage of that, or maybe there's a little loosey-goosey, not as much verification. So I think this is going to be an ever developing story as we kind of find our way through this for us, shall we say.
Yeah, and I think, the research is really kind of coming up to the point that hybrid work is probably the best for most positions, not all positions. Obviously, you need people to work in the workplace, and then you need people to complete 100% work remote. So I just think it will kind of develop over time. And it really, I think, if I'm working with a client and they're asking me, what do I think about it? I'm going to say it's going to be a case by case basis.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be not only by position, but also by person, right? Because you could have some people, I can do that position, no problem. I can do it at home. I'm effective. I'm efficient. And then I have other people doing that same position. Maybe they're not effective and right. And so working with and creating a policy and a procedure of like, hey, this is our remote work policy and procedure is kind of really important, I think, for everyone to kind of think through it and think strategically what it means. I don't think it means bringing everyone back in the office. That I think is that overreach for me. So
yeah. Well, speaking of new technologies, I know you have always been what's the word? Ringing the bell to be aware. But this is a tutoring firm. And this came out last month, but I wanted to bring it up now since we're continue to talk about employee rights. Well, it was an algorithm that screened out applicants over 60. So get this. So they had to pay $365,000 to settle a lawsuit because they screened out older applicants. Well, how do you figure this one out, right? So this is what happened was this applicant.
Is this the iTutor group?
Yeah, it's the iTutor group. You've seen this, okay?
I've been using this for a while.
What's that?
I've used this story for a while in my classes.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, exactly. And it just, and it's finally settled out, and they rejected more than 200 applicants. And what ended up happening was the person, this lady, and is a female, right? Because she applied for a job and she put in her real birth date. Now, I don't really recall any applications that ask for your birth date right off the bat, but she was immediately rejected. So then the next day she reapplies again with the same information, but she uses a more recent birth date, and she was offered an interview. Boom. Yeah. So I just found that fascinating that AI, and we could call it AI, but it was their recruiting algorithm, their screening process, and they got caught. Once again, whether they were doing it on purpose or not, and I would feel hard to say they were not doing it on purpose, but someone was sleeping at the wheel. They do deny the allegations. I'd like to point that out.
Legal note. They do, right? And one of the things is in that story is this was not a company. The company originally was not from the United States. And so my guess is they brought their algorithm from their land, right, or their country, and did not adjust it for the United States rules and regulations, which, again, good call out is like, hey, just because you're a foreign company doesn't mean you don't have to follow the United States rules, right? And so, again, paying attention to that becomes kind of important as well.
And another part of their claim, just want to throw this out because some people think, oh well, we can use this as an excuse too. But they said, oh, our tutors are not employees; they are independent contractors, and so that might have been in dispute too. But regardless, drop the mic again. They lost and had to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's a lot of tutoring, John. A lot of tutoring.
Yeah, a lot of tutor by hour. Yeah, and again, I've been very cautious about using algorithms, using artificial intelligence in the recruiting and hiring process, using artificial intelligence in the in our work as well, just because of those type of things. And algorithms are designed by people, and those people have biases, right? And so you have to be very careful that the algorithms you're using are not unintentionally having a discriminatory impact on your hiring, right? And so just kind of paying attention, always making sure that you as the HR professional or the small business owner are going, well, let me just double check, make sure we're not accidentally or unintentionally doing those things. I think it's kind of important to make sure that we're doing that as well.
Absolutely. And what else you have? Anything else interesting for us today before we launch into our main series of stories today about employee rights?
Yeah. Well, I have one other thing, and and it was an interesting article, and I would love to hear people's thoughts on it. Obviously, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, Chuck. But what we're finding where they can, this is not something that works in every industry and every company, but where they can, workers or employees are tailoring their schedule to accommodate their productivity peaks. So we know, right? We know that everyone has times when they are much more productive during a regular day. Mm-hmm. When they're not, right? And so, Chuck, when's your most productive time? When are you most productive?
Yeah, I tend to be really productive early mornings if I can get up early enough. So early mornings, and then believe it or not, late evenings. It seems like late evenings, if I'm not tired and sleepy, I seem to, everything's very quiet and I'm able to start. I don't know what it is, but my late evenings are productive. So those are my two peaks, mornings and evenings.
Yeah, I can definitely vouch for that because that's when I'm getting all my emails from you. All right. I get up, everyone, and Chuck has had like 16 emails at me, and I'm like, what? What am I doing? I'm just getting up. But I too, mornings are the most productive for me as well. I will tell you the worst time for me in terms of productivity is probably around 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon until after dinner. And then I can get productive in the evening if I need to address something. If I have a big project coming up, I'll do work then as well. And I do think one of the things that we talk about in my time management course and managing our priorities is that it's not just time oriented as well, right? There's times when we just got a big win and we're going to be very productive right after that. Or some people are less productive after lunch, right? And so it's really depending on what's going on in a person's there. But so what they're saying is, so the theory is this: if I take the things when I'm most productive on a regular basis, and that's when I do my work, I'm going to get a lot more work done versus if I'm working 9 to 5 every day, and that's my schedule, right? And so I may not be most productive early in the morning, or I may not be most productive between 9 and 5, but after 6 o'clock, man, that's when it hits and I run and I can get so much done. And so workers are now naturally, especially the remote workers, are naturally just doing that. Saying, hey, you know what? This is when I'm productive. This is when I'm going to work. I'm going to get things done. And I think we see that in the team at HR Stories. The whole team is very asynchronous. Yeah, asynchronous. I can't pronounce the word. You know that.
Yeah, I know what you mean, though.
And so people will be like, first thing in the morning. I know Kate always Sunday evening will get 3 or 4 things. Samantha's usually early on Friday mornings. And so it's really just different depending on the person, right? And so that works for our team. And so we all do that to kind of go, okay, great. And we know that that person may not respond at other times, right? And so kind of building that into our culture has been really beneficial.
That's cool. That's cool. Asynchronous. So you mentioned your time management workshop, and I'm excited to say we've got the team at HR Stories. We've been offering our workshops and online seminars, and we've already had 2 under our belt. Had a fantastic employee retention seminar that is available on our website for you to download if anyone would like to dig into that. And I know we have another great seminar coming up in October 27th, developing an HR department for organizational success. Do you want to chat about that briefly?
I just want to correct you a little bit, because that's September 27th.
Boy, I'm looking at the wrong calendar. So, that's what happens when you're asynchronous.
Yeah, that's right.
Too much.
So that is the 27th of September, where Chuck is actually going to come in and help us better understand how do we develop that HR department for success. One of the things Chuck has done over his career is really build HR departments from scratch, right? And so helps organizations do that, helps individuals do that. And so, Chuck, I'm really kind of looking forward to hearing what you have to say there. And then you have another one coming up in the beginning of October about how to do a successful HR investigation. And I have seen that workshop. And so I think people are going to love that workshop, because it's really not just like we think about sexual harassment investigation, but it's also about people stealing things, discriminating, and how do we do that well so that we are not getting the organization in any more trouble, at the same time protecting our employees' rights as well. And so I think that's going to be a great kind of topic to dive into for sure.
Yeah, folks, you want to go to team@hrstories.com, team@hrstories.com, and in the top header, click on workshops, sign up, and we'll go from there. You're going to love them. They're highly interactive, and we've gotten some great feedback.
That's great. All right, I think it's time for our break, Chucks, and then we'll get into the employee rights section of our podcast today. Wow. It's early in the morning here in Nashville, so I'm still trying to wake up. Not my productivity there. All right, so thank you for listening. We'll be right back after this break.
Hello, listeners. I have some questions for you. Do you find yourself struggling with HR and employment issues? Are you afraid you could make the wrong employment decision that will cost your company thousands or even millions of dollars? Maybe you're new to the world of HR, or you've been in HR for a while and you just wish you had one resource, a guide to help you get HR right. Well, I've got good news for you. The team at HR Stories is excited to announce a new comprehensive resource, the Ultimate Book of HR Checklists. We created the Ultimate Book of HR Checklists as a simple, step-by-step resource guide packed with 70 downloadable checklists and other resources that help small businesses and organizations get human resources right. Even with very little HR or management experience, you can get instant results with concise, practical steps for addressing many of your tough employment issues. Do not miss out. Go to hrchecklist.com to learn more. That's hrchecklists with an S.com to learn more. And as always, thanks for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where the lesson is always in the story. Welcome back to the HR Stories podcast, where there's a lesson in every story.
So, listeners, I was going through our virtual mailbag, and we got so many positive comments about our last podcast titled "We Are All Employees." HR professionals love the reminder that we are, as a group, are employees. And employees chimed in saying it was helpful to understand their rights under employment laws, which I thought was interesting. That's what we figured would happen, but it was kind of nice hearing that as well.
Yeah, someone commented that it was, and quote, it was such an eye-opening podcast. I never thought about the legal ramifications on how I treated my employees. And another said, yes, as HR professionals, we are all employees too and deserve to have our rights as well.
Yeah, it's always good to get feedback that our conversations that you and I are having, which we have regularly, we just now record them, are helping people.
Yeah, that's true. And I agree with that. So what do you think our number one comment was?
That was easy. Want more stories about employee rights. That was it. Right across the board, everyone said, look, we want to hear more of these stories.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that makes sense. We can do that. Knowing rights can not only help employees to better enjoy their job, but it also helps keep companies and managers out of hot water with those federal and state agencies. But it does overall improve employee retention or employee relations and retention. So, I could go on and on. But I wanted to start off with something, John, that I read in the news today, if I can, about workplace safety. And I know we talked earlier, stories in the news, but workplace safety, once again, is always something to keep in mind. So recently, federal inspectors from OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, found that Amazon, in one of its warehouses in New Jersey, had exposed their employees to, and let me quote this to you, ergonomic hazards capable of causing serious physical harm.
Ouch. What is considered an ergonomic hazard?
Yeah, I don't see that too often, but it can be many things. Ergonomics is, I guess it's the science concerning the design and arrangements of things, the way people interact on the job, ideally in an efficient and safe manner. But in this case, just to make it more real, this was during what they call the pack task. Employees were required to manually upload items from cages, requiring them to bend and to perform long reaches to the back of the cage to lift up packages. So if you can imagine, these are large, I guess, just cages, right? Where boxes and packages are there. They've got to lean all the way in, extending their back, extending their arms, extending their neck, and lift these packages out, which every once in a while is okay, but frequency many times plays into these injuries. And because of the frequency of these lifts and the awkward lifting positions, placed employees at risk for low back injuries.
So in this particular case, right, it was the combination of lifting and bending that caused the poor ergonomics.
Yep, and the notification cited actually many other issues.
So what can Amazon do going forward?
Well, OSHA actually gave them specific plans, including performing a worksite analysis to evaluate existing manual lifting and pulling hazards to develop a more ergonomic situation.
That's great. Yeah. And so I think, what can employees do if they find themselves in a similar situation?
Obviously, bring it up to management, bring it up to whoever your leaders are, document these things, capture what's happening and why you think it may be causing you any type of physical harm. And that's definitely the first step.
Okay. And so if that doesn't work, what do we do then?
Well, unfortunately, in companies and HR, you're going to hate me when I say this, but seriously, and you're going to have to reach out to OSHA and perhaps contact them and file a complaint.
It's interesting because we mention OSHA, we get into OSHA a lot here in our podcast. But what would you say, Chuck, is OSHA's role in the workplace?
Yeah, overall, and that's a great question. There's a lot of people are like a fear of OSHA. OSHA, but they're really there to ensure the safe and healthful working conditions for workers by setting and enforcing standards, and also ensuring that there's training. They provide training, they provide outreach, they provide education and assistance. They're not just the group that comes in and says you're doing everything wrong. They actually have a great outreach program too to help companies stay safe.
Yeah. So, employees stay safe, right? Again, it's a right of the employee to stay safe. And so how do they do this? Like, how does OSHA work? Can you kind of get into that a little bit?
Yeah, well, there's this thing, and we've mentioned it before we mentioned in all of our webinars and all of our online and our in-person classes when we teach about employment law and HR law, and it's called the OSHA General Duty Clause, which basically says that employers are required to provide their employees a place free of recognized hazards that could cause serious harm and death. And as we mentioned, OSHA has a lot of standards and a lot of guidelines, but not every standard and guideline can cover every possible situation that happens at work. So that's why OSHA has this overall kind of this blanket thing called the General Duty Clause.
Yeah, and I think that's good. So in other words, right, we're in the employee rights section here. Employees have a right to have a workplace free from recognized hazards.
Correct, like the Amazon workers we just talked about.
So if I'm an employee, how do I know something is deemed a recognized hazard?
Oh, sure. Well, I would think that if it's something that could cause, if you're walking around and you see something that could cause injury or death or any type of harm, that's your first ding, ding, ding. Oh my gosh, here may be something. But also get this on the OSHA website. And I have to tell you, OSHA has a great website. They have tons of information, and employees, if they have a question, they can go there. If they're not getting an answer from their company, they can go to OSHA's A to Z page, and it lists everything from, abatement verification guide to Zika virus.
Wow, you know that pretty good. I see that you're doing your research on this. Right, and so it sounds like we could do a whole show on OSHA specific rights and regulations.
Yeah, probably 10 shows, more than 10 shows. It's important that employers and employees get the proper safety training, which OSHA and many organizations do.
All right, so one final question before we move off of OSHA, and I know I'm kind of putting you on your OSHA hat on. I'm an employee. I think my workplace isn't safe. I talked to my manager, I talked to my HR person, and I haven't seen any changes. What should I do?
Yeah. Well, you're going to have to go to the OSHA website, and that's the deal. If you're talking to your leaders, and also, John, some places have unions. I know they go to their union, but ultimately, you go to the OSHA website, and about halfway down is a section titled "Take Action." File a complaint. And unfortunately, there are plenty of stories and situations where companies and their leaders did not listen to employees about potential unsafe conditions. They ignored them. Then an accident happened, and it was too late. So you as an employee, don't wait and don't feel it's none of your business. You should get involved because it's your right, number one, and number two, it could be saving someone's life.
Yeah, I think, I mean, gosh, whew, that's kind of a heavy statement, but I think it's good, right? And I think it's
Yeah.
important that we, as employees, do that, right? So the goal of this episode really is to help employees and HR professionals make sure they know the employee rights. But it's not only employees that have rights, also, it's also people applying for jobs have right as well.
Yeah. And with that, I noticed a pivot. Is that our pivot moment, John? What do you...
I don't know. I thought maybe we were tired. I was tired of the ocean. I wanted to
Oh,
kind
yeah. Okay. I was
of.
going to keep talking OSHA, but tell me, what do you have in mind?
I was thinking about questions asked during the application and interview process.
Aha, yes. And we in HR in the News at our earlier segment, before we launched into this, we talked about AI and algorithms. But I have to just say, how many times have you and I talked about this overall subject in our classes?
Yeah, in our workshops, in our seminars, in our consulting business, we do it all the time. I'm always making sure managers and supervisors know what questions they should avoid and those they can ask.
Yeah, there are tons and tons of stories, but there's one in particular that that I'm reminded of that I recently heard. It's a company called Exact Sciences Laboratories. This is a gentleman named John Larkin. He applied for a sales rep job and was not selected. When he talked to the recruiter, they said the company is seeking a more junior person. And when Mr. Larkin followed up and asked why he wasn't hired, they stated it was because of his salary request. But then the EEOC gets involved because Mr. Larkin's like, he takes to the EEOC, and they find out, get this, after investigation, that a younger worker was hired at a higher salary level. Boom.
Yeah. Wow, right. And just to clarify for all the employees that are listening, the EEOC stands for the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and their responsibility is to make sure employees are not getting discriminated in the workforce. So that sounds for sure like age discrimination. And one of the questions that employers should not be asking during the hiring process is a person's age, because it could lead to age discrimination lawsuits, right?
Yeah, it's funny. I have an old application, and someday I'm gonna have to share it and load it up. But from the mid 1980s, 86, 87, 88, I was a junior recruiter at Walt Disney World, and I have one of our old applications, and we asked birth date, social security number, height, weight, all kind of crazy things, John. So times have changed, but you are correct. Anything having to do with personal characteristics that are protected by law, such as race, color, religion, sex, national origin, or age, should not be asked in that part of the process.
Yeah, and don't forget the questions about a person's disability as well.
Oh, yeah, definitely. For example, employers should not be asking candidates, hey, do you have a disability? Hey, I noticed you were limping when you came in. Is everything okay? What medications are you on? Have you filed any workers' comp claims?
Right. Yeah, and I would say if you're uncomfortable with any of the questions being asked in the interview, ask the interview if it's required that you answer that question. If they say yes and you're still uncomfortable, walk away. Just walk away.
Yeah. It's tough when you are trying to look like a good candidate and to not answer a question because you're afraid if you push back, you may not get the job. However, an employer is not going to get any better and may end up discriminating against you in the long run.
Yeah, one of the things that I would say is that if I'm hiring an HR person, I may try to slip in a question that they should deem and not answer, just to see what they say. Because what I want them to do, I want them to stand up and go, oh, I'm sorry, sir, you can't ask that question. That's an illegal question. but I want to see how they handle it, right? And kind of doing that becomes important. All right, so I just want to take a moment here, Chuck, and talk to the HR professionals who are listening. In our guide, The Ultimate Book of HR Checklist, we list the top 30 questions you should avoid and the top 30 questions you can ask, and provide a hiring checklist as well. If you're interested in getting this for your organization, go to our webpage, team@hrstories.com. I think it's under products, Chuck, and they can find the Ultimate Book of HR Checklist. They can learn more about it there.
Yeah, and you can look inside the book. You can request to have a preview download. So there's all kind of options. John, and I know you don't want to go back to OSHA, but just real quick, we've got some great resources in there about OSHA. What happens if OSHA sends you a letter? What happens if OSHA shows up at your work location? We've got absolutely fantastic checklists that cover many things in dealing with OSHA. But it is a great resource to give to your hiring managers also, so that they know what they can and cannot do, not only with OSHA, but I know we're talking about recruiting, but regarding recruiting and asking questions.
Yeah, and I love giving that questions, the 30 top questions to avoid, to people that are going to be part of the interview process, right? So the hiring manager, maybe coworkers are going to interview. They need to know what questions they can and cannot ask, right? Because the company can still get in trouble if somebody says, "Hey, what church do you go to?" Innocently just wanting to know. That could be seen as discrimination based on religion, right? And so that person may be like, "Oh, well, I think they're asking that because they don't want to hire somebody from a certain religion background," right? And so you have to be really careful. All right, so I've made it, Chuck. I'm an employee. I made it through the interview process and I'm hired. What other rights should I know about?
Yeah, well, let's start with some rights you do not have. You do not have. In most cases, the First Amendment doesn't apply to private employers. In fact, employers can restrict certain elements of your rights to free speech.
However, we do have a right to talk about wages and our working conditions, including our bosses, even on social media, correct?
Oh, absolutely. And that is protected. The National Labor Relations Act, Section 7 and 7(8) specifically talks about that. And we discussed it in our last podcast.
Right, the first part of the employee rights podcast, right? So we have two. This is the second one. The first one we did that. All right.
Yes.
Let me go through and ask some questions and see what we can do. Can an employer limit what we say on social media, or discipline or terminate us for what we say on social media?
Well, it depends on what you say and their policies.
All right. So for instance, if I'm posting on social media when I should be working.
Yeah. When you're working and you're just posting on your personal social media, sure, they can terminate you.
Okay. What about, for instance, if it's after work and I post racist comments on there? I won't, but what if I did?
Yes, even if it's after work, they could terminate you.
Okay. How about offensive opinions on topical events?
Absolutely, you could be terminated. They can terminate you.
Okay, what about truthful statements about working conditions? I get on social media and I can't believe that I am only being paid $22.33 an hour to do this disgusting job.
Yep, that is protected. I mean, when I say yep, I mean nope. Yes, it is protected under the National Labor Relations Act. Nope, they cannot terminate you for that.
Okay, what about comments about joining a union? I'm on social media and I'm like, hey, everybody, I'm thinking about starting a union at my company. What do you guys think about it?
Well, that is protected, but if your employees are saying that, you better take note and figure out why they're thinking that.
Yeah, right. So maybe that's a good red flag for the HR professionals in the audience to go, maybe we need to have a conversation. Always recommend bringing in some employment lawyers at that conversation to know what you can and cannot do.
Oh,
Many
hugely.
stories out in the news, right? Many stories out in the news where companies, this happened in Nashville, I think. It just happened that Starbucks has to, I think it was Starbucks, has to reinstate 3 employees they fired because those employees were doing union organizing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it's there. All right, look, we could go on forever. I think my advice to employees is to be careful of what you post on social media, especially if you are telling people where you work. So if you have put into your social status, I now work at such and such a place, I would be very careful what I'm posting on my social media feed.
Yeah, and that is a developing thing in some cases, as new technology, new media and such. But overall, I agree. I would advise them, if they are being fired for what they said on social media, to at least reach out to an employment lawyer and discuss the case with them.
Yeah, right. Because there's a lot of times where companies will fire somebody, especially small businesses, because they posted their salary on there and said, "Oh, I'm not making paid enough," or "I think we need a union in our work," and then they fire you. Then you might have a thing, but other times you might not. But really reaching out to an employment lawyer and getting all the facts and figures, they can make a good decision for you. I think that's really good advice.
Yeah. So can I bring up another not right? Yeah, what I mean, a right that someone may not have that they think they do, because employees may be shocked to know that as employees of private employers, not so much public agencies, but as private employers, they have very little right to privacy at work.
Yeah, I got to be honest. When I first, back in the day, when I first started working, I was surprised, and I couldn't believe that my employer could search my locker at work at any time.
Yeah, and your computer and your desk and almost anywhere you can expect privacy.
What about bathrooms?
No, you have an expectation of privacy there. In fact, if your employer provides changing rooms for expressing, let's say, breast milk, you also have the right to privacy there.
Yeah, which kind of leads us to another right? In the under the new law, the Pregnancy Worker Fairness Act, which states employees have a right to take breaks to express breast milk.
Yeah, and a place that is clean and free from interruptions. And for our HR listeners, we created a checklist for the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act and the Pump Act. And you can find these on our website, team@hrstories.com, and request a free download.
So anything else about privacy, Chuck? What about smartphones? Can an employer access them?
Once again, the old HR answer, it depends. But yes, overall, if they are owned by the company, then absolutely yes. If the employee is using it for business and the company is reimbursing the employee and paying for the data, then yes. And also, a lot of people may be surprised that during an investigation of harassment, which we'll talk about coming up in a couple of weeks during our class, if the target, and what I mean by target, the victim, okay? The victim, that's kind of a newer word that we're saying, not victims, but if the victim target says they were sent text messages or other items from a perpetrator's phone, the employer can ask to see that employee's phone.
They can ask, right? The employee does not have to give it to them, but then the employer then can dismiss them, saying, well, you're not following one of our instructions, so we can do that, right? So here's my thing, is really definitely check to see what your company policy is on that. We always make employees sign a policy telling them that what information we have a right to, right? And so if there's data involved or the company's paying for data, I would definitely find out. When I worked at one company, we had a specialized app that we could download that gave us information about companies' company's performance, right? And so when we downloaded that, there was a very clear line that says this now gives them access to our phone. And when I left the company, they wiped it clear. They said, okay, we're taking everything off of this, including photos and texts and emails, and all this stuff is going. And so just got to make sure what your policy says. So as an employee, one of the things that I would urge you to do is go through your employee handbook and make sure you understand every single policy and how it impacts your rights and your responsibilities as well.
Yeah, good point. Good point. In fact, one of the services we offer here at the team at HR Stories is to help you write, rewrite, review policies to keep them fresh, to keep them relevant. And I just want to call out that one of our latest offerings, if you've not received it yet, is our sample AI in the workplace policy that we're now offering, and we'll put the link below in the show notes. You just sign up for our newsletter and we will send that policy to you.
That's a free download, right?
It's a free download. It's something that we're offering to our listeners and fans of the HR Stories podcast. Yes.
That's great. Fantastic. All right. I want to keep going, and I want to start with this and continue with this statement, Chuck. Employees have a right to be employees.
Okay. Huh?
Yeah, right. So look, right, a lot of our stories we share on the podcast are about workers being misclassified as independent contractors instead of employees. So we do have a right to be an employee.
Absolutely. Sometimes it can be complicated, but... Oh, well, John, okay, I'll play. How should I know if I should be an employee?
Well, first of all, you have to do you're right. It is completely complicated, and it's actually one of my favorite subjects because I had to deal with it so many times in my career that I became pretty clear of, hey, this person's an independent contractor and this person's an employee. So if you're hired as an independent contractor, and the employer, your payee, as they like to say, starts treating you like an employee. So for instance, if they ask you to attend staff meetings on a regular basis, give you the employee handbook, tell you need to follow it, provide you training, and give you specific instructions on how things need to be done, most likely you are an employee.
Yeah, if I'm a contractor and anyone else has the same job and they're an employee, well, that would send some red flags up for me.
Yeah, right. And we had two individuals doing the same job. One was hired in as an independent contractor. One was hired as an employee. The independent contractor, after about 6 or 7 months, said, why am I not getting the same benefits as this person? We're doing the exact same job. We're going to the exact same meetings. We're doing the exact same thing. And that opened our eyes, and we had to say, oh yeah, you should be an employee, right? We had brought somebody on to do something temporary with very specific instructions, but then it had melded into them acting more like an employee. And so again, right? And so we have to be careful. As employers, we use 3 different tests to classify someone as an independent contractor. There's the ABC test, was typically used on the state level. There's the IRS 20 common factor test, and then the Department of Labor has a test as well.
Yeah. And I will tell you, if as a worker you're unsure, you can go to the Department of Labor and get assistance. If as a manager, a business owner, or HR professional, you're unsure, the Ultimate Book of HR Checklists, we actually cover that in several checklists in the book. And I know we've given that website out, but in the show notes below is an opportunity. So just a lot of things to think about, John. Just so many things, so many balls in the air. It's tough being a business owner and HR, and it's tough being an employee sometimes too.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we're juggling all that stuff. And as employees, right, we're focusing on employees today. We walk in and we're not clearly stated These are our rights. And so we have to know, we have to do the research. And we've done a great job today over the last hour covering a lot of employee rights.
Yeah, agreed. And there's a lot of great companies out there, John, but there's a lot of companies out there that just don't have their stuff together. So employees really need to know that they have several rights. And in this last, hour or so, we talked about the right to a safe work environment, the right not to answer interview questions that will lead to discrimination, the right to express breast milk, the right to take breaks to express that breast milk, the right to post about working conditions on social media, and the right to be treated, boom, as an employee.
Right. And we also talked about rights that we don't have, right? And so I think that's a really important thing as well. And you and I were talking about this, I think it was last week, and we were talking about, and when I always talk about the employee and the employer relationship, employment laws really govern that relationship, right? It tells us what are our rights and what are our responsibilities as an employee, but also as an employer, we have rights and responsibilities as well, right? And so there are some rights as employees we don't have, right? We don't have the right to First Amendment at work in the private sector. We also don't have the right to privacy in the workplace as well.
Yeah, and I know you probably want to wrap things up, John, but I'm thinking of one more right that has been huge in the news recently. And in fact, we did a podcast on it recently also, and that's the right to religious accommodations.
Oh my goodness, that's such a good one. If I have a sincerely held belief and need an accommodation, the company needs to provide me with that accommodation if it doesn't provide an undue hardship to that workplace. Yeah. So for example, if a worker wears a Muslim hijab, we can't require them to take it off.
Yeah, unless it would cause a safety, security, or some sort of health concern. But you got to make a really, a case for it. You can't just say it. It has to be real.
Has to be compelling. Perfect.
Yeah, for more information, we did do a similar podcast titled Price Check at Kroger. Listeners, check it out.
Any final thoughts, Chuck, before we go?
Yeah, we didn't cover every right, even with these 2 episodes. So if you feel like you're not being treated fairly, first go to your HR if you can, go to your department manager or supervisor. But if they're not treating you right, obviously go to your HR person, discuss it with them. They have obligations to protect the company, but also to follow employment laws. Any final thoughts with you, John?
Yeah, I think employment laws, I just said it, right? The employment laws are there to govern that relationship between employees and employers, meaning that both parties, employees and employers, have their rights and responsibilities. As employee, it is our responsibility to know your rights, and you have to take the time to know your rights and go, hey, I'm doing this. And a lot of times we go to the work for the first time in our lives and we listen to the people around us and we hear certain like whispers and all that kind of stuff, or we'll go to Google and we'll look up our rights and responsibilities. Here's the thing. I would go to Department of Labor website. I would go to the OSHA website. I would go to the EEOC website to find out what your rights are so you really understand them. And I would say to our HR professionals that are listening, it's your responsibility to know your employer's rights and responsibilities and properly enforce them consistently throughout the company.
Yeah. And as a reminder, next podcast, we'll be talking about stories that impact businesses, employees, and human resources. Please let everyone know about our podcast. John, I've seen some of our reviews on Apple Podcasts, and they're fantastic. We've received several more reviews. Folks, we love HR. We love doing this podcast. And if you enjoy today's episode, please give us a review on your favorite podcast player.
And don't forget to check out The Ultimate Book of HR Checklist, your step-by-step reference guide to getting HR right.
Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there's a lesson in every story.
Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast. The material presented in this podcast is for informational purposes only. Chuck and John always recommend using an employment lawyer or HR consultant to handle any legal concerns or HR issues. We do our best to double check sources and make sure the information we are providing is accurate. We may eliminate or embellish without changing the basic narrative to make the story easier to understand. In certain circumstances, we may change identifying information to protect the innocent. The HR Stories broadcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories is designed to help anyone with HR responsibilities be better at managing the employee experience. To engage with us, go to the hrstoriesteam.com and learn more about how the team at HR Stories can support your business or nonprofit. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story.